Okay, Shalom Yashrali. Welcome. Giving all praise and glory to the Most High, Yahweh, Shama Mashiach El-Shai. I've been going over the religious instructions to the Negroes, or of the Negroes, the United States of America. I'm going to continue to go over this because I figure that no one's really reading it. Tell people to look into it, but nobody's really looking into it, so I figure I'd go ahead on and read it so you have no excuse and you'll know where a lot of these religions stem from as far as the programming that happened to we as the children of Israel from 1620 on. So we're going to look at page 72 of the religious instructions of the Negroes in the United States of America by Charles Colcott Jones. And it reads, in the winter of 1830 and the spring of 1831, two associations of planters were formed in Georgia for the special object of affording religious instructions to the Negroes by their own efforts and by missionaries employed for the purpose. The first was formed by the Reverend Joseph Clay Styles in McIntosh country, embracing the neighborhood of Harris Neck, which continued in operation for some time until by the withdrawal of Mr. Styles' labors from the neighborhood and the loss of some of the inhabitants by death and removals, it ceased. The second was formed in Liberty County by the Midway Congregational Church and the Baptist Church under their respective pastors, the Reverend Robert Quarterman and the Reverend Samuel Scribe Law, which association, with one suspension from the absence of a missionary, has continued its operations to the present time. One or more associations for the same purpose were formed in St. Luke's Parish, South Carolina, in which John David Bunyan, Esquire, took an active part. 1831. An address entitled The Religious Instruction of the Negroes, delivered before the associations of McIntosh and Liberty counties, was published and circulated in newspaper and pamphlet form. 1832. Edward R. Lawrence, Esquire, delivered an address before the Agricultural Association of South Carolina, in which this duty in the form of oral instruction, in which this duty in the form of oral instruction, in which this duty in the form of oral instruction. In other words, repeat after me. Oral instruction. What they said, we repeated it. Under proper arrangements is recognized. Southern Agriculturalist, 1832. A short catechism for the use of the colored members on trial of the M.E. Church in South Carolina by W. Capers, D.D., Charleston, 1832. This short catechism was prepared by Dr. Capers for the use of the Methodist missions to the Negroes of the South Carolina Conference, and it is used by all the missionaries. 1833. The Missionary Society of the South Carolina Conference, which had now fairly entered upon its work, reported that the missions were generally in flourishing circumstances, that there were 1,395 colored members and 490 children under catechetical instruction at the mission stations. The society also recommended the establishment of 4 or 5 new stations and the appointment of 3 or 4 new missionaries for stations already occupied. Report page 12 to 5. The first annual report of the Liberty County Association was published and circulated in 2 editions. 2 essays were read before the Presbyterian of Georgia in April 1833, one on the moral and religious condition of our colored population, and the other a detail of a plan for the moral improvement of Negroes on plantations by Thomas Savage Clay, Esquire of Bryant County. They were both published by order of Presbyterian. A detail, etc., by Mr. Clay, which was indeed the result of his own experience and observation on his own plantation for many years, was extensively circulated and received with approbation, and has done and still is doing much good. In December of this year, the report of the committee, to whom was referred the subject of the religious instruction of the Negroes of the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia, was published. To this report, a series of resolutions were sojourned. Number 1, that to impact the gospel to the Negroes of our country is a duty which God is in His providence and in His word imposes on us. Number 2, that in the discharge of this duty we separate entirely the civil and religious condition of this people, and while we devote ourselves to the improvement of the latter, we disclaim all interference with the former. Number 3, that the plan which we shall pursue for their religious instruction shall be that permitted by the laws of the states constituting the bounds of this synod. Number 4, that we deem religious instruction to master and servant every way conducive to our interests for this world and for that which is to come. Number 5, that every member of this synod, which he endeavors to awake others, shall set the example and begin the religious instruction of the servants of his own household systematically and perseveringly as God shall enable him. Number 6, that we can not longer continue to neglect this duty without incurring the charge of inconsistency in our Christian character, of unfaithfulness in the discharge of our ministerial duty, and at the same time meeting the disapprobation of God in our consciences. The narrative of religion of the Synod at the same session holds the following language. The Synod continue to feel the same responsibilities and desires on this subject which they have repeatedly expressed. They rejoice to find that increasing attention is paid to it on the part of many who are largely interested as owners in this class of our population. And then it's page 24 and 34. The project of forming a domestic missionary society under the care of the Synod with special reference to the religious instruction of the Negroes was somewhat discussed chiefly in private, and a committee was appointed by the Synod to bring in a report at the next meeting. The reports from the Episcopal churches in South Carolina to the convention evidenced much attention to the Negroes. The Reverend Joseph R. Walker of Beaufort reported 57 communicants and 234 members of the Sunday school, which was conducted by the first and best society in the place. Bishop Lives of North Carolina addressed to his convention on the interesting subject of providing for our slave population a more adequate knowledge of the doctrines of Christ crucified. He stated in a letter to Bishop Meade that active efforts in behalf of this people were made in 5 or 6 of the churches, and singled out the Church of St. John's, Fayetteville, embracing between 300 and 400 worshipers, of whom 40 were communicants. There were several religious newspapers conducted by different denominations that advocated openly and efficiently about this time. The religious instructions of the Negroes, the Gospel Messenger, Episcopal, Charleston, the Charleston Observer, Presbyterian, the Christian Index, Baptist, the Southern Christian Advocate, Methodist, the Western Luminary, Kentucky, and there may be added the New Orleans Observer and the Southern Churchman, Alexandria, besides others. Through these papers, having an exclusive circulation, the subject was presented to the minds of thousands of our citizens. There was published this year, 1833, a plain and easy catechism designed for the benefit of colored children, with several verses and hymns, with an appendix compiled by a missionary, Savannah. The missionary was a Methodist, the Reverend Samuel J. Ryan, who labored among the Negroes on the Savannah River. The encouraging success which had attended the labors of our preachers among the slave and free black population of the South stimulated our brethren in the Southwest to imitate their example by opening missions for the special benefit of this class of people. Hence, at the last session of the Tennessee Conference, the African Mission, embracing the colored population of Nashville and its vicinity, was commenced. A regular 4 weeks circuit was formed, and the good work was prosecuted with such success that in 1834 there were reported 819 church members. Bangs 4, page 143. 1834. A meeting was held in Petersburg, Virginia in March 1834, composed of representatives from the synods of North Carolina and Virginia. After disposing of the special business for which the meeting was called, the subject of the religious instructions of the Negroes was discussed, and as a result, a committee was appointed, consisting of 3 ministers and elders in each of the states, to bring before the Presbyterian the subject of ministers giving more religious instructions to the colored people, and to collect and publish information on the best modes of giving oral instruction to this class of our population. That committee, of which Reverend William S. Plummer, D.D., now of Richmond, was the chairman, performed its duty and presented a report to the synods of North Carolina and Virginia at their fall sessions in 1834. The same report, with some accompanying documents, was forwarded to the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia and read before that body in December 1834. The Committee of the Synods of North Carolina and Virginia reported a plan for forming a society by the concurrence of 2 or more synods for the purpose of affording religious instructions to the Negroes in a manner consistent with the laws of the states and with the feelings and wishes of planters. The plan was laid before the Synod of North Carolina and acceded to. It was laid over by the synods of Virginia and South Carolina and Georgia to their sessions in 1835, and then, for special reasons, indefinitely postponed. A report was presented by a committee of the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia on this plan. The report was adverse to it, an account of the extent of the proposed organization, the excitement of the times, and the belief that each synod could of itself conduct the work more successfully than when united with the other 2. The constitution of the proposed society, the reason in favor of it, and Dr. Plummer's report were all laid before the public in the columns of the Charleston Observer. The report has been several times referred to in this sketch. The Synod of South Carolina and Georgia, December 1834, passed the following resolutions. Number 1, that it be enjoined upon all the churches and the presbyteries comprising this synod to take order at their earliest meeting to obtain full and correct statistical information of the number of colored persons in actual attendance at our several places of worship, and the number of colored members in our several churches, and make a full report to the synod at its next meeting. And for this purpose, that the stated clerk of this synod furnish a copy of this resolution to the stated clerk of each presbytery. Number 2, that it be enjoined of all presbyteries in presenting their annual report to synod to report the state of religion in the colored part of their congregations, and also to present a statistical report of the increase of colored numbers, and that this be the standing rule of synod on this subject. The narrative states that increasing efforts had been made to impart religious instruction to the Negroes. Minutes, page 22 and 29. The Synod of Mississippi and Alabama, in their narrative, November 1st, 1834, say, another very encouraging circumstance in the situation of our churches is the deep interest which is felt in behalf of our colored population, and the efforts which are made to impart to them religious instruction. All our ministers feel a deep interest in the instruction of this part of our population, and when prudently conducted, we meet with no opposition. A few of us, owing to peculiar circumstances, have no opportunity of preaching to them separately and at stated times, but embrace every favorably opportunity that occurs. Others devote a portion of every Sabbath, others a half of every Sabbath, and 2 of our number preach exclusively to them. During the past year, the condition and wants of the colored population have occupied more of our attention than at any previous period. And in future, we hope to be more untiring in all our efforts to promote their happiness in this life and in that which is to come. In their resolutions, this synod enjoin all under their care directly to make united efforts to provide means for the employment of missionaries to give oral instruction to the colored population on the plantations with the permission of those persons to whom they belong. In the same year, 1834, the Kentucky Union for the Moral and Religious Improvement of the Colored Race was formed, and a circulation addressed to the ministers of the gospel in Kentucky by the executive committee of that union, to which the Constitution was apprehended or appended. It was a union of the several denominations of Christians in the state. The Reverend H.H. Kavanaugh was president. There were 10 vice presidents selected from different quarters of the state, and an executive committee of 7 members located in Danville, of which Reverend John C. Young was chairman. President Young told me at the General Assembly of 1839 that this union has not accomplished much. The second annual report of the Liberty Colony Association was published, giving some good account of their operations. An essay on the management of slaves, and especially on their religious instruction, read before the Agricultural Society of St. John's Collection, South Carolina, by Whitemarsh B. Seabrook, president, was published by the society. Mr. Seabrook reviews some former publications on the religious instruction of the Negroes and suggests his own plans and views on the subject. The Right Reverend William Meade, Assistant Bishop of Virginia, published an admirable pastoral letter to the ministers, members, and friends of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Virginia on the duty of affording religious instruction to those in bondage. The bishop, in his zeal and personal efforts of this subject, demonstrates the sincerity of his published opinions. The Missionary Society of the South Carolina Conference reported 5 missionaries to the blacks in North Carolina, 1 the rest in South Carolina, and 2,145 members and 1,503 children under catechistical instruction. The Colored Man's Help, or the Planter's Catechism, Richmond, Virginia, was now published. Also in the Charleston Observer, biographies of servants mentioned in the scriptures with questions and answers. These admirable sketches were prepared by Mrs. Horace S. Pratt, then of St. Mary's, Georgia, and now of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The Reverend Horace S. Pratt, previously to his appointment to a professorship in the Alabama College at Tuscaloosa, and while pastor in the St. Mary's Presbyterian Church, gave much of his attention to the religious instruction of the Negroes and prepared at his own expense a comfortable and commodious house of worship for them, and which they occupy at the present time. Also, a catechism for colored persons by C.C. Jones, printed in Charleston, 1835. The third annual report of the Liberty County Association was printed in more extensively circulated than the two preceding. In the narrative of the state of religion in the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia, it is said, even the religious instruction of our slave population entirely suspended in some parts of the country through the lamentable interference of abolition. Fanatics has proceeded with almost unabated diligence and steadfastness of purpose through the length and breadth of our synod. Minutes, 1835, page 62. Bishop Bowen of the Diocese of South Carolina prepared at the request of the convention a printed a pastoral letter on the religious instruction of the slaves of members of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the state of South Carolina, to which he appended scripture lessons for the same. The subject had been presented to the convention by an able report from a committee, and a portion of the report was embodied in Bishop Bowen's letter. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference reported this year 2,603 members and 1,330 children under catechetical instruction. 1836, the Reverend George W. Freeman, late rector of Christ's Church, Raleigh, North Carolina, published 2 discourses on the rights and duties of slaveholders. Mr. Freeman, with pathos and energy, urges upon masters and mistresses the duty of religious instruction, page 30 to 34. The report of the Liberty County Association was prepared but not published this year. The operations of the association during the year have been successful. The bishops of the M.E. Church in the United States, in their letter of reply to the letter from the Wesleyan Methodist Conference, England, held the following language. It may be pertinent to remark that of the colored population in the southern and southwestern states, there are not less than 70,000 in our church membership, and that in addition to those who are mingled with our white congregations, we have several prosperous missions exclusively for their spiritual benefit, which have been and are still owned of the Most High, or at least owned of God, as it is written. To the conversion of many precious souls on the plantations of the South and Southern and Southwest, our devoted missionaries are laboring for the salvation of the slaves, catechizing their children and bringing all within their influence as far as possible to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And we need hardly add that we shall most gladly avail ourselves, as we have ever done, of all the means in our power to promote their best interests. The total number of colored members reported for 1836 was 82,661. 1837, 1838. The subject of the religious instruction of the Negroes was called up and attended to in the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia both these years, and many Sunday schools for children and adults reported from the different presbyteries. It also received attention in all the southern synods. There appeared to be a growing conviction of the duty itself, and on the whole an increase of efforts. The instruction of the Negroes in Liberty County by the association was carried forward as usual during the summer of these years, but in consequence of the absence of the missionary in the winters, no reports were published. The Missionary Society at the South Carolina Conference prosecuted its works with encouraging success. In an annual meeting in the town of Columbia, South Carolina, they collected for their missions to the Negroes between $1,200 and $1,500. Bishop Meade collected and published sermons, dialogues, and narratives for servants to be read to them in families. Richmond, 1836. The second edition of the Catechism for Colored Persons by C.C. Jones, Savannah T. Purse, 1837, also a catechism to be used by the teachers in the religious instruction of persons of color, etc., prepared in conformity to a resolution of the convention under the direction of the Bishop Charleston, the Reverend Gentleman of the Diocese of South Carolina, who united in preparing this catechism were Dr. Gladstone, now Bishop, Mr. T. Trappier, and Mr. William H. Barnwell. The following resolution was passed in the Episcopal Convention of South Carolina in 1838. Resolved that it be respectively recommended to the members of our church who are proprietors of slaves, individually and collectively, to take measures for the support of clerical missionaries and lay catechists who are members of our church for the religious instruction of their slaves. And again, resolved that it be urged upon the rectors and vestries of the country parishes to exert themselves to obtain the services of such clerical missionaries and lay catechisms. 1839, 1840. From the reports of the Liberty County Association for these years, it appears that a revival of religion commenced toward the close of the summer of 1838 among the Negroes and extended very nearly over the whole country or the whole county and continued for 2 years. The whole number received into the Congregational and Baptist churches on profession of their faith was fully 250. The number of adults and children under catechetical instruction in the Sabbath schools connected with the association and in the different churches ranged from 5 to 700. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference reported in 1839 13 missions, 210 plantations, 19 missionaries, 5,482 church members, and 3,769 children catechized. In 1840, 13 missions, 232 plantations, 19 missionaries, 5,482 members, and 3,811 children, minutes. Methodists returned in 1840, 94,532 colored persons in their connection. Reverend T. Archibald, Presbyterian, labored as a missionary to the Negroes in Mississippi for several years, and in 1839, after leaving his charge, in consequence of the abolition excitement, he received a call to preach to the Negroes in Morago County, Alabama. Reverend James Smiley and Reverend William C. Blair of the same denomination were and still are, if our late information be correct, engaged in this good work systematically and constantly in Mississippi. The Reverend James Smiley is characterized as an aged and indefatigable father. His success in enlightening the Negroes has been very great. A large portion of the Negroes in his old church can recite both Williamson's and the Westminster Catechism very accurately. The names of many other pastors in the South might be given who have consciously and for a series of years devoted much time to the religious instruction of the Negroes connected with their churches. The Reverend James Smiley and Reverend John L. Montgomery were appointed by the Synod of Mississippi in 1839 to write or compile a catechism for the instruction of the Negroes. The manuscript was presented to Synod in October 1840 and put into the hands of a committee of revision, but it has not yet been published. The table of the state of the churches of the Sandbury Baptist Association, Georgia, gives 6 African churches with a total of members of 3,987. As returned, one of these churches did not return the number of communicants. Of the other churches in the table, 5 have an overwhelming majority of colored members. The 3 African churches in Savannah are all connected with this association. In the appendix to the minutes, it is said, the committee to whom was referred Brother Sweat's letter on the subject of a mission among the African churches report that it is highly important that such a mission should be established and recommend that the subject be turned over to the executive committee with instructions that the brethren engaged in that work during the past year be compensated for their services. Your committee further recommend that Brother Connor be employed as a missionary by the association, provided he will devote half his time to the colored people. And again, that the table showing the state of the churches may be more correct than the present, it is requested that at the next meeting of the association, the church clerks will distinguish in their reports between the white and colored members, and that such churches as send no delegates will forward a statement of their condition. Missions to the people of color are noticed in the annual report of the Missionary Society of M.E. Church in 1840. The report thus speaks, and surely those who devote themselves to the self-sacrificing work of preaching the gospel to these people on the rice and sugar plantations of the South and Southwest are no less deserving the patronage of the missionary society than those who labor for the same benevolent object in other portions of the great work. Of these there are chiefly in the Southern Conferences 12,402 members under the patronage of this society. Report page 23. 1841. The report of the same society for this year refers also to missions to the colored population. In no portion of our work are our missionaries called to endure greater privations or make greater sacrifices of health and life than in these missions among the slaves, many of which are located in sections of the southern country which are proverbially sickly and under the fatal influence of a climate which few white men are capable of enduring. even for a single year. And yet, notwithstanding so many valuable missionaries have fallen martyrs to their toils in these missions, year after year there are found others to take their places, who fall likewise in their work, ceasing at once to work and live. Nor have our superintendents any difficulty in finding missionaries ready to fill up the ranks which death has then in these sections of the work. For the love of Christ and the love of the souls of these poor Africans in bonds constrain our brethren in the interment work of the Southern Conferences to exclaim, "Here are we, send us." The Lord will praise for the zeal and success of our brethren in this self-defined and self-sacrificing work. The Missionary Society of South Carolina Conference reported this year a mission exclusively to the Negroes. 14 plantations served 301 members, 6,145 children under catechismal instruction, 3,407, and missions 18. The report gives an animated and cheering view of the prospects of these missions. The great object of the society in them is thus expressed. So to preach this gospel that it may be believed, and being believed may prove the power of God unto salvation, is the great object. And we repeat it, the sole object of our ministrations among the blacks. This object obtained, we find the terminus if our anxieties and toils of our preaching and prayers. Report page 12 to 17. The total of colored communicants in the Methodist connection is given in the minutes of the annual conferences for the years 1840, 1841. For 1840, 94,532. For 1841, 102,158. The South Carolina Conference is ahead of all, having 30,481. Next comes the Baltimore Conference, 13,904. Then the Georgia Conference, 9,989. Philadelphia, 8,778. Kentucky, 6,321. And so on. Minutes, page 156. The Sunbury Association reported this year 7 African churches with 4,430 members, from 1 no returns. Adding to this number the returns from the mixed churches of white and black, and an estimate of some from which no returns were made. A total of 5,664 colored members is obtained. Appendix B, resolved that the committee be authorized to offer a sum not exceeding $50 per month for 1 or more ordained ministers to labor among the colored people in destitute churches within the bounds of this association. Just a moment.